As a young woman and her father posed for a photo in front of Tower Bridge during their vacation in London, they were hoping to capture a beautiful family moment. However, upon closer inspection, the woman noticed something shocking, and she panicked. Little did she know that this one image would alter the course of her life in ways she could never have imagined. Stay tuned for more shocking details. Alicia Ellie Gibson, an 18-year-old, was taking her father, Henry, for a stroll along the Queen's Walk in Souk, London. They had just finished their morning walk and were making their way back to their Airbnb apartment on Bury Street. As they passed the sparkling river, Ellie looked over at her father and said, "We should do more trips like this as a family. It's truly amazing." Henry winked at Ellie. "You might need to cut back on that online shopping habit of yours if you want to plan another trip next year." Ellie laughed. "The sound is light and carefree." And Henry chuckled, "Well, sweetheart, we've pretty much emptied out our holiday savings jar for this one." They continued their leisurely pace as the iconic Tower Bridge came into view. Standing near a sleek photo booth, the kind she'd often seen at her friends' weddings and events, a man approached Ellie and her dad with a friendly smile. He noticed their American accents and offered them a lovely souvenir, a photo booth that could print on magnetic surfaces instantly and include a digital copy, for only £999. Ellie's excitement was palpable, and her dad couldn't help but agree. Reminisce about this day, Henry nodded in agreement, unable to contain his daughter's excitement. "All right, let's do it." They posed together, with Henry leaning behind Ellie and hugging her. The photo booth came to life, printing out the magnetic photo in record time. Henry paid the man, accepted the print, but a moment of surprise flashed across his face as he tucked the picture into. As they headed to the Airbnb, Ellie couldn't help but wonder if her father was unhappy with the photo or if he was reluctant to spend more money to take another shot. She decided to set those feelings aside and focus on getting a digital copy from the cameraman. Meanwhile, Ellie reached for her phone to ask, "Dad, do we look good?" Henry's tone was slightly rushed as he said, "Let's head back now, sweetheart. Put those worries aside and concentrate on the thrill of seeing more of London with her parents." If the photo didn't turn out the way they hoped, they could always come back later and take more. Their apartment was only a 5-minute walk away. After a long day, they finally arrived at their cozy Bury Street apartment, which had become their temporary home for a week. Ellie's mother, Lisa Gibson, greeted them warmly as they entered, asking how their morning walk had been. After they finished organizing their luggage, Lisa asked, "Did you bring me some?" Henry brought out a paper bag containing a fresh quant and set it on the table. Ellie, who was still over the moon from their photo session, flopped onto the couch and pulled out her phone. Lisa, sensing her daughter's excitement, glanced over at Henry and asked, "What's so exciting?" Henry explained that they had taken a picture together at Queen's Walk, and Ellie playfully said, "Dad is being sneaky." Henry playfully remarked, "At least you have the digital copy to share on social media." "You know me too well, Dad." Ellie, who was already engrossed in her phone, replied, "Okay, then." The quiet energy of the cozy Airbnb apartment was palpable as a family on vacation, and Lisa savored her croissant as Ellie meticulously edited the photo for her social media post. Henry, ever the perfectionist, with a slight frown, restless soul, looked around the room. He broke the comfortable silence and said, "We've accumulated quite a bit of trash already. I think I'll take it down to the garbage chute and maybe get some fresh air while I'm at it." Ellie continued to work on her photo, zooming in and adjusting the contrast, while Lisa and Restless Soul nodded absently, both familiar with Henry's need for the outdoors. Even back home in the U.S., he was rarely content to stay inside for long. Henry gathered the trash and headed outside. Brightness as something drew her attention in the background of their picture-perfect moment. It wasn't just the bin, though. It was a missing person flyer. Peering closely at the small image, Ellie could make out the face of a young girl. The words, which were still missing, were boldly printed above the child's photo. Ellie felt an odd familiarity as she stared at the girl's face, but she couldn't quite place why. Unusual sensation, Ellie completed the photo edits and posted it to her social media account. Just as she hit post, her mother's voice interrupted her. "Ellie, honey, I'm done with breakfast," Lisa called out after her meal. You know how impatient your father gets when he's waiting. Ellie tucked her phone into her purse and accompanied her mother as they left the apartment. They were expecting to see Henry waiting in the hallway or lobby, but when they stepped outside, they realized he wasn't there. Lisa and Ellie didn't seem too concerned because they knew Henry would disappear and then reappearance without a word. Henry was never quiet, but they figured he'd reach out when he was ready. So they shrugged and started walking along the riverbank, following the route Ellie and Henry had taken earlier. Eventually, they ended up back at the location where the photo had been taken. The cameraman was still there, busy with other clients. Henry, to Ellie's astonishment, was standing by the trash can with the missing person flyer. Ellie and Lisa approached him, their curiosity piqued. "What are you doing?" Ellie asked with a hint of concern. After all, trash cans are rife with germs. However, it was Ellie who asked the question that had been on her mind the whole time. "Daddy, why are you taking down that poster?" Henry's expression changed from shocked to speechless as he struggled to explain. A mischievous grin crept across his face as he casually mentioned that a family in the United States must have posted the photo in an effort to find their missing daughter. He chuckled nervously, folding the FL and putting it into his jacket pocket. The image brought back a flood of memories of those horrifying kidnapping stories from your childhood. Ellie furrowed her brow, a nagging feeling creeping up her spine. Feeling a sense of unease, Ellie pushed her doubts aside. She reminded herself that her father was likely just being overprotective in his own peculiar way, and that he was likely just doing his fatherly thing. As they continued their exploration of London, Lisa fussed over Henry, who was using hand sanitizer. Ellie wondered why he wouldn't just ignore the flyer. Going out to explore more of the city, Ellie couldn't help but think about the little girl's face. As the Gibson family continued their exploration, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across London's cobblestone streets. The city's energy pulsed around them, and any suspicions Ellie had earlier faded away, replaced by the excitement of their adventure. The hours flew by as they soaked up the sights, each moment filled with laughter and wonder as they embraced the beauty of their surroundings. At precisely 1 o'clock in the afternoon, as the Great Ben clock tower chimed, Henry checked his watch, making a familiar gesture that seemed more devilish than normal. "I'm getting hungry," he announced with an air of forced casualness. Ellie trailed behind them, her phone screen a sharp contrast to the subdued tones of the historic city. Henry and Lisa scanned the area, their eyes darting from one charming cafe to another. Her heart skipped a beat as she scrolled through the notifications from her earlier post. One comment in particular made her jump. "OMG, Ellie, that girl in the missing person flyer looks so much like you. It's like seeing your mini-me." Ellie's steps froze, her mind racing as she reread the comment, captivated by the playful tone of her friend's words. Ellie Henry's voice pierced through her thoughts, sending shivers down her spine. She glanced up to see him pointing towards a charming restaurant, its outdoor seating area adorned with colorful flowers. "How about this place?" he asked, his gaze fixated on the blurry image of the flyer in the background. The little girl's face, barely visible in the low-resolution picture, seemed to stare back at her with an unsettling familiarity. Ellie accompanied her parents to a fancy table tucked against the building's weathered brick facade. The RW iron chairs slid against the pavement as they settled in, echoing in Ellie's ears. Ellie's mother strained to read the menu, her brow furrowed in concentration. Ellie stayed glued to her phone, typing out a reply to her friend. She carefully selected each word to sound casual, but conceal the unease she was experiencing. Ellie Henry's repeated calls, his voice betraying an unusually serious concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone shocking Ellie. She hurriedly put her phone back in her purse, apologized to her father, and mumbled something about getting distracted. They placed their orders with a friendly waitress whose accent lilted the music. But Ellie couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was familiar, and her thoughts kept returning to the missing person flyer. Ellie's anxiety had grown since she read her friend's comment. The soft sound of nearby tables' conversations and the rustle of the tablecloth added to her mental strain and the aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the air as the servers set their plates on the table. "Dad," she exclaimed, her voice breaking the pleasant silence that had settled. Henry's expression changed from relaxed to visibly tense as he clenched his jaw and spoke with a strain in his voice, as if he were trying to force the words out. He seemed to be worried that the missing child flyer, which she had taken down earlier, had slipped out of his pocket or been blown away in the wind. Ellie's expression turned serious as she scowled and glared at Henry. Henry's hand slid to his jacket and patted the pocket in a gesture that appeared more theatrical than sincere. "Sorry, darling, it's not there anymore," he added hastily, his words spitting out in a torrent. "It's probably for the best because you would just get upset if she insisted, her voice unwavering despite the tremor of doubt coursing through her. Spotted at Lisa, who had been watching the exchange with her fork halfway at her mouth, finally spoke up. "What's this about a flyer?" "I'm curious too." Her voice had a hint of real confusion, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes that matched Henry's dismissive wave of his hand. He insisted that we shouldn't ruin our holiday mood over a piece of paper, but Ellie couldn't help but feel irritated by his dismissiveness. Ellie asked, "Do either of you have any of my childhood photos on your phones?" In an effort to shift the conversation away from their brooding feelings about the flyer, which her father had avoided discussing since that morning. Henry's clenched fists were a visible sign of the uncomfortable tension that had built up between them. Henry's face turned white as he tightly gripped his napkin, and his voice clenched as he demanded to know why Ellie was bothering him. Despite her racing heart, Ellie attempted to maintain a light and casual tone as she idly traced patterns on the condensation of her water glass. "I posted that picture we took together on social media, and my friends keep saying how similar I look to that little girl in the flyer. Like, I'm just the adult version of her." Ellie shot back, her words clipped and sharp. "Your mother and I raised you, and you don't look anything like that." His tone made Ellie feel uncomfortable, but she continued in a playful manner that seemed forced even to her. Henry's expression became more serious as lines began to form around his mouth and eyes. "I'm afraid not, sweetheart," he said, his voice softening in a way that seemed scripted. "My phone memory was full, so I transferred most of the files to our computer before the trip. I don't have any more. Have you any old pictures with me?" Lisa nodded, her body language a little off. "I don't have any on my phone either," Ellie said, her disappointment palpable. She wondered why her father kept avoiding talking about the missing flyer and making excuses, and why such a simple request for a photo from their childhood had turned into a web of red tape. Ellie looked around the restaurant, trying to find a way to distract herself from the awkwardness that had descended upon them. Table, her eyes fell on a woman across the street in Potter's Fields Park. The woman was clearly focused and determined as she put up a flyer, the very same one her father had taken down earlier. Ellie pointed to the park, saying, "There's someone putting up more of those flyers." Henry and Lisa turned to look, their movements almost in sync as they watched the woman work. Their faces turned pale, as if they had seen something terrible. As the woman turned around to reveal her full face, Henry started coughing violently and trembling uncontrollably. Lisa sat motionless, her eyes wide and unblinking, her fork hanging in midair. Ellie whispered, perceiving their peculiar behavior, and asked, "Do you know her?" They both seemed to have seen a ghost, but their responses seemed too staged and too fast to be completely honest. At that moment, their food arrived, and the cheerful waitress was completely unaware. Henry said, "I'm starving, Ellie. If you want to take a picture, please do so." Ellie got up from her seat and placed her phone above the meal, taking a picture of her dish more out of habit than real interest. Her mind raced with questions and suspicions as she struggled to focus on the meal before her late eat. The aroma of freshly prepared food wafted up to mix with the scent of London's summer air. She put down her phone and looked back toward the park, but the woman was nowhere to be seen. The family dined in awkward silence, with only the sound of silverware hitting plates breaking the oppressive stillness. Ellie, with a robotic motion, lifted forkfuls of food, her thoughts racing about the missing flyer, her parents' strange behavior, and the woman in the park. It was as if there was some hidden meaning to all of it, and she ate every last bite. After everything was said and done, the tension at the Gibson family's table was still noticeable. The lively atmosphere of the restaurant clashed with the heavy silence that had descended upon them, serving as a stark reminder of the unspoken words and hidden truths. Ellie, who was still unsettled by the unfamiliar atmosphere, gently cleared her throat before asking where they should go next. Her voice sounded small and uncertain, even to her ears. To her surprise, Henry offered to lend her his voice. Henry shrugged, a tired smile playing on his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes, as Ellie couldn't contain her shock. Her eyebrows arched high on her forehead, and the words tumbled out before she could stop them. The words seemed completely out of character for her father, Henry, who was usually the one advocating for more outdoor activities, always eager to explore and experience new things. Henry pretended to be sleepy and gestured vaguely to explain that he wasn't as young as he once was. Ellie nodded slowly, her mind racing to make sense of the latest oddity in a day full of them. They paid the bill, and Ellie noticed her parents moving with an urgency that matched Henry's professed tiredness. They set off for their Airbnb apartment, which was only a 10-minute walk away. As they made their way from the restaurant, Ellie couldn't help but notice the eclectic mix of old and new buildings dotting the streets of London. The city's rich history was visible in every cobblestone and century-old structure. However, her mind was too preoccupied with the mounting list of questions that needed answering. As they neared the apartment building, Ellie's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the woman from the park, who was now posting flyers outside their building. The woman moved with precision, placing each flyer with care. Her face revealed a mix of determination and deep, enduring sadness. Ellie approached her, drawn by an unexplainable pull. "I hope you find your missing girl, ma'am," Ellie whispered, her hand reaching out to gently tap the woman's shoulder. The woman turned, her eyes widening in confusion. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Ellie felt a jolt of recognition, but she couldn't place the face of this stranger. Henry and Lisa showed up behind Ellie, their movements almost frantic as they dragged her into the building. Ellie stumbled a little, taken aback by their suddenness. "What are you doing?" Lisa hissed, her voice low and strained. "You can't just approach strangers like that." Ellie tried to protest, saying that she had only been expressing sympathy, but the words died on her lips. Ellie's mind raced as she tried to decipher her parents' expressions, raw and obvious fear etched into every line of their features. The three of them rode the elevator in complete silence, with only the gentle ding of passing floors breaking the stillness of the tent. Once inside their unit, an awkward silence descended upon the family. Henry and Lisa, appearing to be casual, set down their belongings and moved about with an air of forced casualness. Henry, in an effort to tidy up, shrugged off his jacket and laid it over the sofa. He then undid his shirt's collar and buttoned it under his jacket. "Your mother and I are going to rest for a bit," he announced, his voice carried with an artificial lightness. "Maybe we can continue our sightseeing later in an hour." By the time Ellie could respond, Henry and Lisa had vanished into the bedroom, with the door closing behind them with a soft click that echoed in the unexpected silence. Ellie sank onto the couch in her apartment, her mind racing. She unlocked her phone and scrolled through more comments on her post. The observations about her resemblance to the missing girl had only grown, sending a shiver down her spine. She typed out a reply, trying to deflect attention with a joking emoticon. However, even as she hit send, she knew that the lightness of her words was a poor mask for the turmoil she felt inside. She set her phone down, her solitude consuming her. Henry's jacket, innocuous and unremarkable, lay carelessly tossed over the sofa arm. Ellie felt an overwhelming pull toward the item, as if it held the answers to the innumerable questions circling in her mind. Almost unconsciously, Ellie reached for the jacket, her hands quivering slightly as they rummaged through its pockets. Her breath caught in her throat as her fingers caressed paper, finding a missing person flyer and a magnetic photo print from that morning heart. With trembling hands, Ellie unfolded the flyer. The paper felt rough against her fingers, the weight of it somehow more significant than it should have been. She ran her fingers over the printed image, taking in details she hadn't been able to see clearly in the hallway. With little time to spare, Ellie hurried to her own room, quietly closing the door behind her. There, she heard her parents' indistinct voices. Ellie was taken aback by the sight of the little girl's face in the low-resolution digital copy of her social media post. Her innocent smile and wide eyes betrayed her innocence, and the date 2005 made her gasp out loud. The realization that the girl looked remarkably similar to Ellie. Not only that, but she would have been Ellie's age, struck a chord with Ellie, and she began to wonder if, in fact, she was simply. While she was mulling over the situation and trying to figure out where she might find the childhood photo, an idea came to her while listening to trembling hands. Ellie went back to her father's profile on social media and scrolled through years of posts, each swipe revealing a different aspect of her life that she had always assumed. Eventually, she reached the oldest ones and saw a photo of herself from a few years after the missing girl was born. Her heart seemed to stop as she stared at the photo. Sitting on her bed in a rented apartment in London, thousands of miles away from her life she had always known, Ellie looked at the picture for the first time. The resemblance was undeniable, unmistakable. In that moment, questions she had never considered before demanded answers. Why was there a picture of her here, so far from the U.S., and why had her parents been acting suspiciously since the morning? Was there something they weren't telling her? Was there something she needed to know? As if she were holding more than just a piece of paper, a key to unlocking the truth of her existence. Ellie took a close-up shot of the flyer using her phone. Her hands trembled as she delicately folded the paper, creasing it along the same lines it had been before she left her room. With great care, she returned the flyer to Henry's jacket pocket, making sure it was arranged exactly as she had found it. As she stood at her parents' bedroom door, one hand on the handle and the other poised to knock, she yearned for answers, even though she knew they would likely give her more excuses or be furious with her for interrupting their sleep. However, as her knuckles drew near the wood, she heard muted voices emanating from within, causing her hand to freeze. She leaned in closer, pressing her ear against the door, feeling the sharp contrast between the cool surface of the wood and the heat of her flushed face. Ellie pressed her ear against the cool wood, her heart pounding so loudly that she feared it might drown out the conversation. The words came through, each one a dagger to her heart, shattering the last remnants of a life she thought she knew. She kept asking about that missing girl photo, and Henry's voice, tinged with panic, reached her ears, the fear in his. Henry's words carried a desperate edge, as he insisted that Lisa wouldn't betray them. However, there was a heavy pause filled with unspoken truths as Lisa's response was softer but no less devastating. Ellie felt her chest tighten as she realized she had been holding her breath. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and the room spun as the implications of what she had just heard hit her like a tidal wave. In her shock, Ellie stumbled slightly, her hand accidentally pushing against the edge of the table. Lisa's voice was heavy with a long-held secret. If Henry had known, she would have hated us, and our holiday in London had been a mistake. As the door swung open, a gentle creak sound escaped the room, revealing Henry and Lisa. Their expressions betrayed their shock and horror at realizing Ellie had been listening. Time seemed to freeze as they locked eyes, their breath holding the truth like a tangible presence. Ellie felt as if she were gazing at strangers, as the once familiar features of her parents' faces took on an otherworldly, menacing quality. Mom and Dad. Ellie's voice quivered, her words stuttering as she struggled to break free from the deceit she had unknowingly endured for the past 18 years. Years later, Ellie finally had enough. She yelled out, "Stop lying to me." Her voice quivering with emotion as tears welled up in her eyes and traced across her face. Henrik's face turned pale, as if he had seen a ghost. In his panic, he tried to cover up his lies, but his words came out in a jumble. "We weren't talking about you, sweetheart. We were talking about the neighbor's child." Henry's shoulders slumped as he spoke weakly, his words sounding hollow even to his own ears. It was for your own good, he said, his voice filled with anger and hurt. Ellie responded with a cross of her arms over her chest, as if trying to hold herself together, as she roared, "You've been lying all day, all hours. I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not stupid. Just tell me the truth." Everything came crashing down for Ellie in the following hours. Henry and Lisa revealed the web of lies they had spun around her life in a confessional session that seemed to fill the Airbnb living room. They told her the story of that tragic day in Hyde Park, London, when she was 3 years old, how they had followed her family for days, waiting for the right moment to abduct her, and how each word was. Henry's hollow eyes were fixed on something beyond Ellie as he explained. "Your real parents were chatting with another couple while you were playing near a small ice cream stand." Lisa picked up the storyline, her eyes watering from the story, and she made no effort to wipe them away. "I walked up to you, pretending to trip and spill a drink near your parents, hoping it would distract them." Meanwhile, Henry's gaze finally met Ellie's, and the pain he was feeling became palpable. His gaze mirrored the pain in her heart as she made a promise to treat you to ice cream. "You were such a good girl, so trusting, and you didn't fight at all." They spoke of forged documents, a flight to the U.S., changing her name from Sarah Wells to Ellie Gibson, and constructing a life around a kid that had been stolen. With each revelation, Ellie's life was shattered, piece by piece. As they spoke, Ellie felt detached, as if she were witnessing the unfolding events from a distant apartment. Henry extended his hand as if to touch Ellie, but Ellie retreated, a tiny movement that conveyed a great deal about the broken trust between them. Through the years, they had been a family, caring for each other and providing for each other, but now they felt alienated and threatened. The air was heavy and oppressive, and the walls seemed to close in. Henry whispered, "You're crazy." Her voice was thick with unshed tears, and he called them criminals. Ellie's words were poisoned with hate, as she said, "Just because we lived as a family for a long time doesn't mean you're not child kidnappers." Lisa attempted to correct her sister, but Ellie cut her off. "We love each other. Family doesn't have to be blood relatives. There are so many." Lisa's voice quivered as she finished her sentence. "I loved you both, but now," Ellie said sharply. Henry and Lisa's expressions changed as they realized the gravity of the situation. Henry reached out to Ellie, his voice low and menacing, while Ellie recoiled in horror, her eyes wide with disbelief. The man standing before her appeared nothing like the caring father she had known for 18 years. Henry's hand shot out, grabbing her arm with bruising force. His face contorted with a mixture of desperation and misguided love. He growled, saying, "You're out of your mind." Ellie, who had called him father for 18 years, struggled against the iron grip of Henry, and she realized that she would end up in jail for what she said. Ellie's world was turned upside down as she darted her gaze between Henry and Lisa, desperately trying to find a trace of the caring parents she had once known. The truth, which had been concealed for so long, had finally surfaced, and its revelation would trigger a series of events that would change the trajectory of everyone's lives, including her own. The atmosphere in the room was electric, with tension palpable. Ellie's voice trembled with emotion as she fought against Henry's clutches, her free hand pressing against his chest. Henry's expression was a mix of fear and determination, and Ellie could see a desperation in his eyes that she had never seen before. "We need to sit down and discuss this," he said, his voice barely controlled. "We love you, Ellie." The words that had once brought solace now resounded hollow in Ellie's ears. How could they profess to love her when their entire existence had been constructed on deceit? The life they had woven seemed to be a shaky foundation, and Ellie could feel it crumbling beneath her feet. Now, they insisted she wasn't a prisoner, but what exactly was a prison? Even the most exquisite home they had constructed for her felt like a prison now that they had taken. Ellie's fear transformed into a raging wrath as she screamed. "I hate you!" Tears streamed down her cheeks as she spelled out the words. "You're liars, child kidnappers!" Henry appeared to snap at the words, his hand clenching rose. In a flash, he smacked Ellie across the face so hard that her lips split and blood trickled down her chin. The room fell silent as the sound reverberated through the air. Henry took advantage of Ellie's momentary stunned state by pulling her roughly towards the bathroom. His grip was bruising, and his movements were jerky and uncontrolled. With a forceful shove, he pushed her inside, and Ellie stumbled, catching herself on the door. This was a physical manifestation of the violence that had been done to Ellie's life. Lisa gasped in horror as she watched the scene unfold. Henry's voice came across as a mix of anger and desperation as he pleaded with Ellie, "Let me out." His voice was hoarse with tears and fear, and the small bathroom space seemed to enclose her, intensifying her panic. He loved Ellie deeply, and everything we did was for your benefit. We gave you. Ellie collapsed to the floor, her back against the door, sobbing uncontrollably. The taste of blood in her mouth served as a sobering reminder of how abruptly her world had crumbled, and the cold tiles of the bathroom floor only served to heighten her anger and fear. How could they claim that abducting her and deceiving her whole life was for her own good? The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Outside, she could hear Henry's agitated pacing and Lisa's muted cries. The sounds of their distress, which had once troubled her, now only served to heighten her own misery. These people, whom she had loved and trusted completely, were now her captors. Henry's voice wavered between threatening and pleading as he yelled through the door, warning her not to panic if she did not calm down. The threat lingered in the air, heavy and oppressive. Ellie felt a shiver run down her spine at the thought of spending nights locked in this small space. They were only in London for a week, so they would eventually let her out of the bathroom. Still, she felt she wouldn't be able to escape them once they returned to the U.S. A spark of hope emerged, though, and she felt a wave of relief wash over her. Ellie's defiance flared up as she screamed back, her voice quivering with defiance. "You can't keep me here forever. This isn't home." Her mind raced with the reality of her situation, and she began to wonder about her real parents, the ones she had never met, and whether the woman she had seen putting up fly swatters had actually been her mother. The thought brought a new wave of tears to her eyes, and she wondered what her life would have been like without being taken away, about the love she would have found, about the truth she had been denied, and about the experiences and love she might have had. Ellie found herself in the living room as Henry's panic grew. Henry's heavy and erratic footsteps echoed through the room, and she could hear him pacing back and forth. In her mind, she saw him running his fingers through his hair and wiping his face, both of which were familiar gestures, but now had a sinister new meaning. Ellie's world came crashing down around her as she sat trapped in the bathroom, her life turned upside down. She realized that her envisioned future, her college plans, her career aspirations, her relationships, would never be the same. The apartment was filled with an almost tangible sense of dread and regret as Henry continued his frantic pacing, each step a testament to his growing panic. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet, creating a rhythmic counterpoint. Lisa stood in the living room, frozen in silence, tears streaming down her cheeks, as she watched the man she had built a life with unravel before her eyes. The weight of their actions, the years of lies and deceit, seemed to weigh them all down. In the midst of Henry's thought chaos, Lisa remained motionless, her expression betraying her anguish and indecision. Her eyes darted from Henry's movements to the closed bathroom door, where Ellie was trapped. In an instant, Lisa's resolve appeared to crumble, and she hurried to the kitchen, her movements frantic and jerky. Henry was too caught up in his own panic to notice her sudden departure. In the kitchen, Lisa's trembling hands discovered the handle of a heavy cast iron skillet. While Henry paced back and forth in the living room, muttering to himself, Lisa stepped back into the room, her heart racing with a mixture of love, guilt, and resolve as she lifted the heavy iron pan, her mind racing with the enormity of what she was about to do. The cool metal against her palms grounded her, providing a focal point in the whirlwind of her thoughts. As she swiftly placed the pan on Henry's back, time seemed to stand still. A sickening thud echoed through the room, resembling a gunshot. Henry collapsed to the floor, unconscious, his body slamming against the ground with a dull thump that shook their entire existence together. Lisa let go of the pan, her hands flying to her mouth in an attempt to contain a scream. The sound of heavy cookware hitting the floor shattered the sudden silence. Ellie stood there, frozen in her gaze at Henry's lifeless body. The waves of guilt and fear washed over her, but then, as if jolted awake, she hurried to the bathroom door, her hands trembling as she struggled with the lock. The metal was cold and unyielding, but eventually, after what seemed like an eternity, she succeeded in opening it. Ellie was startled by the unexpected invasion. Lisa sobbed into the wall of the bathroom, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. The girl's face was pale and bruised from Henry's attack. The distance between them felt endless, filled with years of lies and betrayal. "I'm sorry for everything. I love you. But why? You need to go to the police and report us. It's the only way out of this," Ellie pleaded. Lisa stared at Ellie with her confused gaze, peered into the wrinkled face of the elderly woman, whose expression had shifted from one of dread to one of bewilderment and cautious optimism. Lisa questioned, her voice raspy from sobs. "Why are you helping me?" The weight of their long-suppressed guilt and sorrow seemed to weigh heavily on her, and she explained, her voice barely above a whisper, that there were only two possible outcomes. Either your father would have harmed you or locked you up for the rest of your life. "I love you too much to let that happen." Ellie's mind reeled, trying to process this sudden turn of events. Part of her wanted to lash out at Lisa, scream and cry and demand answers for all the lies. But then there was another part of her that felt a confusing mix of gratitude and sorrow. Lisa urged for a step back to clear her path. Her eyes darted to Henry's unconscious body, a reminder of how urgent the situation was. "The police will help contact the U.S. authorities." "It's going to." Ellie hesitated for a moment, despite everything. The idea of betraying her parents, whom she had loved for 18 years, felt like a betrayal. Her complicated emotions, including love, hate, fear, and gratitude, threatened to overwhelm her. Lisa appeared to sense her hesitation and spoke softly, her voice breaking on an endearing note. "You deserve to know the truth and set things right." Their words were so honest and raw that they seemed to break through Ellie's paralysis. With a nervous nod, she moved closer to Lisa. As Ellie hurriedly gathered the evidence, the flyers and the photo print, before bolting out of the apartment, the familiar scent of Lisa's perfume, which had once soothed her, sank to the floor next to Henry, who remained unconscious. With a soft click, the door closed behind her, marking the end of one life and the beginning of another. Despite her knowledge that their life, as they knew it, had come to an end, Lisa refused to feel regret for her actions. For the first time in 18 years, she had prioritized Ellie's well-being before her own. As Ellie sprinted through the streets of London, her heart racing and her mind racing, she felt a sense of alienation and danger. Every person she passed seemed to hold secrets that had defined her life. She had no idea what lay ahead, but she was determined to uncover the truth about. Concerned with her history and the family she had never met, she was fleeing from her apartment and the life she knew. But she was also facing an uncertain and terrifying future. The seemingly harmless pieces of paper, the photo print and the flyers, became increasingly weighty as she ran, connecting her past and the life that had been stolen from her 18 years ago. Ellie silently vowed to herself and the little girl she had once been that she would find the truth, no matter how painful it would be, and then rebuild her life from the ashes of the old. As she hurried through the streets of London, her tear-stained face barely registered the curious looks from passers-by. Instead, she focused on the challenges ahead. Ellie's untidy appearance stood in sharp contrast to the busy city around her. People stared at her, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern, but she remained completely absorbed in her mission, to reach the police station. After what seemed like hours, but was probably just minutes, Ellie finally spotted the iconic blue lamp that signified a police station. Seeing it brought a mix of emotions, a mix of relief and fear, and she burst through the doors. Ellie, a young American girl with a bruised and tear-stained face, approached the desk with a clutch of papers and an expression of complete shock. The abrupt change from the bustle of the street to the calm, orderly interior of the station was jarring, and the fluorescent light seemed harsh in comparison to the warm, sunny afternoon. The officers on duty looked up in surprise. Ellie's voice quivered as she trembled and held out the flyer, her grip so weak that she could hardly maintain it. "I'm this missing girl," she proclaimed. The officers' shocked expressions soon turned to professionalism as they assessed the situation. One of them, a kind-hearted gray-haired woman, stepped forward and said, "Come with me." Love, her voice had a soothing London accent, and she gently said, "Let's get you." Ellie was led into a small, sparsely furnished room where they led her to a private area. There was a table, a couple of chairs, and a large mirror on one wall, which Ellie suspected was two-way. As she settled into a chair, the weight of her situation started to hit her. Over the next few hours, Ellie rehashed the story Henry had told her, detailing the kidnapping in Hyde Park, the hasty flight to America, and the years of deceit. The details flowed freely from her mind as she described it. Ellie relinquished the flyers and the photo, carefully securing them as evidence. As she spoke, she felt as though she were recounting someone else's life. The events seemed too fantastical, too cruel to be real. But with every word, she sensed the truth seeping into her bones, revolutionizing her perception of herself and the world. The officers listened intently, their professional masks betraying little. As Ellie finished telling her story, one of the officers explained gently that they would need to collect your DNA. His voice was gentle, but there was no denying the gravity of the situation. "We will also need to contact your biological parents to come in for testing. Typically, it takes a day or two for results, but given the circumstances, it felt like her life was crumbling apart." Ellie nodded in agreement, her mind reeling from the events unfolding around her. As she waited for the DNA swab to be processed, she couldn't help but wonder about her biological parents. What were they like? Would they want her back after all these years? The thought triggered a new wave of anxiety. She had lived her entire life thirsting for a truth that she had no idea was missing, and now that it was within reach, she was almost terrified of it. Her train of thought was abruptly interrupted by, entranced by the same woman who had been outside the apartment posting flyers, Ellie's heart skipped a beat as her mouth pounded with emotion. "I knew it was you," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "I had the feeling when you talked to me earlier." Tears welled up in Ellie's eyes as her real mother rushed forward, embracing her tightly and releasing the scent of her perfume. A man, his face a mix of shock and joy, trailed behind Ellie as she clung to the stranger who was also her mother. Ellie felt her mother's strong arms encircle her, and for a moment she let herself be held by the parents she had never known. The police gently led them into a private room where they could talk, their years of loss and longing pouring out in racking sobs. Ellie's biological parents, Nessa and Edric Wells, introduced themselves to her in a whirlwind of emotion. "We lost you in Hyde Park," Ellie said, her voice dripping with emotion. Nessa explained that she was afraid she might disappear if she let go of Ellie, who was only 3 years old at the time. "We were chatting with another couple when we realized you were gone," and Edric overheard the conversation, his hand tightly clasping Nessa's. "We never had the opportunity to see their faces before. They disappeared with you so suddenly." The anguish in his voice echoes through the years, and Ellie's heart aches for the separation and the pain her disappearance must have caused them. However, a small part of Ellie still can't help but think about Henry and Lisa, the life she knew, the complexity of her emotions, the love she had for her parents, the anger she felt at their betrayal, and the longing she has for the parents she never had. Edric's voice broke as he continued. "We've been searching for you all these years. This was our last ad campaign. We spent our last bit of savings on these flyers. If we hadn't found you now, the weight of those years would have been heavy on Ellie. The unspoken would have hung heavily in the air as his voice trailed off. Ellie felt the unwavering hope that had driven her parents, to keep searching long after others might have given up. The police officer delicately intervened. "We've been searching for you all these years." As he reminded them that there were still legal procedures to be followed, he expressed his understanding that collecting DNA from everyone was necessary. Ellie nodded, understanding the necessity of the matter. However, she couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions as she watched the forensic team take samples from both her and her biological parents. She felt caught between two worlds, the one she knew and the one she was becoming. Ellie looked into Nessa and Edric's faces as she waited for the expedited results, hoping to find a connection to her true identity in their unmistakable expressions of love and hope. However, she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt over the conflicting emotions she was experiencing. No matter what the DNA results revealed, her life would never be the same. The family she had known for 18 years had been built on deceit, but they had still given her love. Now, as she Saturday, Ellie sat in a cramped room with Nessa and Edric Wells, surrounded by fluorescent lights that cast a harsh light on the room. The atmosphere was heavy with tension and unspoken emotions as they waited for news. Ellie's eyes darted between her newfound parents, who were still trying to make sense of their familiar yet strange faces, and Edric, who was pacing the room. As the minutes turned into hours, Ellie's thoughts drifted back to the apartment she had escaped. What had transpired since then? Was Henry still unconscious? Had Lisa contacted the police? The unpredictability of GW's actions served as a continual undercurrent to the chaotic emotions swirling within her, until a gentle tap on the door startled them all. A police officer. He spoke in a measured, low voice. "We've received some preliminary results." The words lingered in the air for a moment before they hit home. Nessa's grip on Ellie's hand tightened, and a small gasp escaped her lips. Edric stopped pacing and turned to face the officer with wide eyes. The officer continued, his tone cautious. "There's been a development at the persons whom Miss Wells claimed as her abductors have been arrested." Ellie's heart skipped a beat as she whispered, "Are they being processed now?" The officer nodded solemnly. "The case is complicated due to the international dimensions and the seriousness of the accusations." Nonetheless, Ellie felt a whirlwind of emotions, including relief, anger, fear, and Ellie's request caught everyone off guard, including herself. The officer looked back and forth between Ellie and the Wells, clearly unsure of how to respond to Ellie's request. When the officer finally left to make arrangements, an awkward silence descended upon the room. Nessa and Edric exchanged anxious glances, and Ellie herself seemed to be unsure of how to respond. Ellie took a deep breath, attempting to make sense of her thoughts. "I know it doesn't make sense," Nessa said slowly, "but for 18 years they were my parents. I can't just understand. I need to see them." Edric knelt down beside Ellie's chair, and he whispered, "We understand." His words were tinged with pain, but his sincerity shone through. "No matter what, we're here for you." Ellie's eyes welled up with tears as she nodded, unable to find the words to express the overwhelming sense of unconditional support she was receiving from these strangers who had become her true family. The officer eventually returned and guided them through a labyrinth of hallways to a viewing area outside the booking room. Through a large window, Ellie could see the processing area, where suspects were photographed and fingerprinted. Henry and Lisa looked small and defeated as Ellie watched them undergo the process. Henry's expression was one of anguish, while Ellie's eyes met hers through the glass. Lisa appeared stunned, moving mechanically as she obeyed the officer's commands. The moment was long, filled with unspoken words and a lifetime of complicated emotions. Ellie cried out, her voice muted by the glass but still audible. "We are so sorry. We surrender. We were never." Henry nodded, his voice quivering with emotion as he said, "We love you." Ellie felt her own tears streaming down her cheeks, and she pressed her hand against the glass, a gesture that fell somewhere between a farewell and a plea for understanding. As Henry and Lisa faded from view, Ellie pondered whether she would ever fully recover from this revelation, and a part of her longed to maintain some kind of relationship. Ellie contemplated abandoning everyone and beginning anew, free from the burdens of her past. Nessa and Edric comforted her, saying, "It's okay, Ellie. We understand this isn't easy. Take all the time you need knowing that you're safe." They couldn't ask for anything more than to witness Ellie's growth as a person and as a result of her encounters with Lisa, who had rescued her from captivity. Ellie nodded in agreement, appreciative of their understanding. She confessed that it would take her some time. This trip to London was supposed to be a family vacation with Henry and Lisa. They had saved up for this European trip for a long time, and they had so many plans, both for the trip itself and for when they returned home. Seeing all of those plans fall apart in one day was difficult. Nessa and Edric exchanged sympathetic looks. "Take as much time as you need," Edric whispered, "even if you want to. We're fine with you staying in the U.S. Moving to London isn't necessary." Ellie's voice trembled as she whispered, "I still love Henry and Lisa." She wished she could hate them instead, but she felt bad for caring about them. Nessa reached out to touch Ellie's arm gently and reassured her. "It's normal. It means you were happy that they cared for you." Ellie nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. There's still a lot to process. Looking at Nessa and Edric, Ellie said with sincerity, "Thank you. I'm glad the lies are over. At least now we can be friends." From her purse, Nessa pulled out an old photograph, which she gave to Ellie. In the photo, she could see a little version of herself smiling for the camera. "You were born here in London," Nessa explained, her voice heavy with emotion. "Our home is here, and it will always be open to you if you decide to come." Ellie felt a warmth radiate from within her heart, so she expressed her gratitude. After exchanging contact information and promising to stay in touch, a police officer arrived and subtly interrupted. "Miss Wells, we need to arrange for your stay here since you're 18. You don't need a legal guardian, but we should discuss your options." Ellie, who had been a carefree American teenager on a family vacation just this morning, found herself reflecting on the outcome as she followed the officer to another room. As she entered the room where her immediate future would unfold, her identity was in a state of flux, caught between two sets of parents and two versions of herself. The weight of the truth was heavy, but it also brought a sense of liberation. For the first time, Ellie felt she could see the world and herself clearly, thanks to the street photographer's lens. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges she couldn't even begin to fathom, but it was also rich with possibilities. In that moment, Ellie felt a glimmer of excitement for what lied ahead, despite the sorrow and bewilderment she was experiencing, since she recognized that although her old life had come to an end, a new one was just beginning.